Our next writer is a student, John Dwyer. He's in his second year here at Rosemont. He grew up in several Philadelphia neighborhoods, survived 12 years of Catholic education, he says barely, and graduated from Temple University with a degree in history. He's traveled extensively and worked in the service industry, particularly at the Atlantic City casinos. He has written newspaper and magazine articles, self-published a science fiction novel, and belonged to several writing groups. The only thing he ever wanted to be was a writer. Welcome, John.
Oh, thanks, everybody. I remember the last time I read last year, there were about 5 people here. So it's great to see the turnout. Not very professional, so please bear with me. I'll be reading a number of unconnected, creative nonfiction. There you go, see? You know what I'm doing. They'll be roughly chronological. We'll see how it goes. First one is called Bloodline. The 3 boys went up to the top of the hill with knives hidden in pockets. It was cool. The late afternoon sky was overcast and the ground covered by wet leaves. A dark forest loomed nearby, and the old Ryers mansion rose above a clear, rolling slope of Burham Park. A white gravestone belonging to a horse watched them. Ready, one asked? They had come here to do it. Each took out his penknife, the stubby gray blade sharp. They waited a moment to see if anyone would back down. Then they started to gash their hands. The blue-eyed one cut into the skin above his left thumb. Brief pain. Several years before, at 10, he had moved from another neighborhood and lost every friend. He spent interminable months hiding in his new house, reading, wondering. Finally, through school and the Boy Scout troop that his parents had forced him to join, Paul and Lou stood out. Now they all held their hands to show the blood and quickly rubbed the wounds together. There were no words. They closed the knives and stood beneath the mottled sky. Any thoughts of cleanliness or infection were banished. From now on, they were the same blood. Even their unborn children would share it. They would work together, play, fight, backstab, cheap shot, insult, betray one another, steal each other's girlfriends if they could, or at least Blue's girlfriends, go to each other's weddings or not, argue about money, sports, cars, jobs, just about anything. They would travel and meet in distant cities, shoot, party, waste time. They would tell each other the truth or lie outright, carry each other's burdens or drop them. Through anger, knowing malice, recriminations, and time, they would come together or drift apart and love the others wherever they were. Now, of course, boys get a little bit older, and they begin to notice girls. This is called 14. And where do they go, those girls we chased in our youth? I will always see golden-haired Mary sprinting through the winter woods, easily outdistancing me. The gray horizon behind her was seamed by a red sunset through black boughs, a few stubborn leaves clinging. My dating sense was nil, however. When I finally got close enough to call to her and ask her where she was running, she turned and retorted, "Someplace where you can't go." After she said this and continued on, I walked grimly back towards Lou and Pete, who had witnessed the scene at a distance. When I realized that Mary meant what she said, I went into my wide, grassy backyard and tore our 4-legged steel swing set out of the ground. Lou and Pete stood and watched as the tall ensemble pitched over. I would not speak to them, nor did they interfere with my outburst. I tried to tell you, was all Lou said, but you wouldn't listen. We put the swings back up before I went to dinner so that my father would not get mad. Mary had lived across the street from me for years. We were both 14. She was one of my first slow dances at St. Hilary's. After dark, another neighbor, Jane, sent my 10-year-old sister Donna over with word that Mary liked another guy and only wanted to be my friend. It did not occur to me to question Jane's motives. She was a wild and enticing girl herself. I was actually afraid to ask her out because her boyfriends were too tough. I would have had to stand in line to get punched. My sister found me sitting in a corner of our shadowy dining room. She seemed both pleased and bemused with the role of go-between in her brother's burgeoning love life. Message delivered, Donna left me alone. Between us, it was the start of that happy, sad understanding that siblings have with adolescence. Then I carefully recorded everything that happened in my journal. I cursed the day and week forever. It makes for pathetic reading. Like a creep, I sat on my front steps for months and watched Mary go out with older guys. Eventually I got over her and went in search of other girls, sometimes grasping them before they too slipped away. By the end of high school, Mary and I hardly ever spoke. I never dated Jane either. Years later, Mary married, had several children and seemed happy, but breast cancer ran in her family. Word slowly came of various operations to remove lumps. Finally, it was a mastectomy. But all of the treatments and procedures could not thwart this disease. Maybe it was kinder for me not to see her lambent beauty carved away over time, but it was nothing she deserved. When Mary died, I was unable to attend her funeral. To me, she will always be a young girl, flashing through the twilight woods, the one who wanted to be my friend, not my girlfriend. Things move on. I get into college and try to follow some ambitions. This is called No Book. I saw an ad in the paper for a book signing by James Michener. I admired much of his work and wanted to talk to him. So after my classes at Temple, I took the train into town and went to Wanamaker's, a line formed by the displays where they sold gloves at Christmas, right across from the Eagle. I waited as people shuffled on. I had no book but several questions. He sat behind the counter, bespectacled, round-headed, dutifully scribbling, sometimes speaking. He took a few minutes to get up from his seat and talk with a young man, apparently about the fellow's own work. I said to myself that I did not want to take up a lot of his time. Though I had done a bit of writing, I was really looking for insight about the process, not trying to make connections with a busy, prominent person. When my turn came, I said, "I like the Drifters. How did you write it?" "I'm glad," he said. "That was a special one." He looked for the volume, pen poised. "I'm sorry, I don't have a copy." "How did you get the stories, the characters?" The book was a series of sketches about mostly young international people in America, Europe, and Africa. It explored issues of the 1960s revolutions, their various perils and opportunities, feminism, racism, patriotism, and religion. Many aspects of change in compelling personal detail. "Well, I knew them," he said. "You knew those people?" "Yes, it was all true." Surprised, I walked away with even greater respect for him, an older white male who could write well about others so different from himself. Muslims, Jews, blacks, non-Westerners, drug users, and ordinary working stiffs. They were all worthy. You had to know them. Now to get back to some more traditional ground. Everybody's been on blind dates. This was one you would not have wanted to have been on. It's called Blind Date. I was the blind date from hell. Lou and I decided to meet his girl Wendy and her friend Patty at Point Pleasant. We would rent 2 aluminum canoes for the day, bring lunches, and laze down the Delaware. We got the 10-foot-long canoes with a reminder that they had to be returned intact. There was a rendezvous further on to deliver them when we finished. They gave us life jackets, and despite being a weak swimmer, I wore mine half-heartedly. I had never met Patty before, and there was no instant chemistry. No twinkles in the eyes. I think both of us were somewhat disappointed, but too nice to show it. She was a muscular brunette with a strong back who carried her share of the canoe to the water easily. Both of us wore cut-off jeans and t-shirts. We started out well. It was an early spring day, blue and bright. The river was swollen. We had maps showing conditions at several rapids and planned to run them. As usual, Lou struck out ahead while I strove to keep up. Patty sat in the bow and I in the stern, supposedly steering. Neither of us admitted any ignorance of canoe physics, but assumed certain competencies. There was little conversation. Just managing the craft took most of our attention. We lingered in some quiet coves, but not for long. Those shaded banks were a haven from a searing sky. The current ran swiftest in the middle of the river. We mostly plowed along there. After an hour or so of trouble-free cruising, rapids appeared, small white riffles in the water. Lou and Wendy shot off about a quarter of a mile ahead, to the left center of our vision. They seemed to slow and then bump over rocks into deeper water. Blindly confident, I decided to follow through to what I thought was that exact spot. Patty and I did our frontier best to catch them. As we neared the passage, I saw there was a drop of several feet beyond the initial rocks. I tried to swerve into an easier channel, but with 2 unfamiliar paddlers, we were just sentient bark. The water pulled us quickly. Instead of diverting our forward progress, the canoe turned sideways right before the waterfall, so we approached the rocks without any steerage and suddenly tipped over. Patty and I hurdled the falls, helpless, and hit eddies amid boulders as the river poured. I was in water to my chin, but felt solid ground beneath me. The boat crashed after us. Seeing the glossy metal, I raised my arms and caught it, breaking its impact. Our extra clothes, paddles, and plastic bag lunches swirled by. Patty seemed unhurt. On the Pennsylvania shore, some 30 yards away, Lou and Wendy could only watch. I grasped the rear of the canoe, straining to keep from losing it completely. The thought of having to pay for the damn thing added to my desperation. We needed to get back in quickly. It lolled sideways, half submerged. The first thing to do was to get the water out. With rocks still underfoot and the threat of being dragged deeper imminent, I was able to flip the canoe into the air from the middle. It spun several times so the water dispersed. Then the canoe landed flat. Patty, meanwhile, had coolly gathered our things and was swimming for her life. "I'll hold it," I said. "You get in." She tossed the gear into the canoe and flopped aboard. When she was stable, I joined her. Whether from tension or sheer relief, neither of us spoke. We reached the shore, and all was stretched out on some flat white rocks. I apologized abjectly, pleading confusion. Lou agreed. I was foolish but lucky. "I wasn't sure you were going to make it," he said. Patty was completely unflappable. "It wasn't your fault," she just stated generously. We all ate Lou and Wendy's lunch and took the easiest channels to the rendezvous. Having almost killed the girl once, we skipped the ordeal of the second date. As time went by, I decided to hit the road, take some trips. This is called Florence. The valley of the Arno simmered, hills glowing deep olive oil green gold, iridescent beneath an azure sky and sliding sun, while a city of terracotta roofs, brown towers, and red domes spread across the river. I saw it from the long, tree-strewn slopes around me, which were dotted with multicolored tents, pitched in dry grass and late afternoon shadows. But even a Renaissance revelry demanded clean clothes. I stood bare-chested at an open waist-high sink, washing socks, underwear, and one of my 2 shirts. Besides cut-off jeans, I wore a furry rabbit's foot that once belonged to Jimi Hendrix. It hung around my neck on a hide cord. Lou and I made it to Florence early that morning, hitching up from Rome all night, and immediately began searching for David. We found him everywhere. Being stupid American tourists, we did not realize that there are many copies of David throughout the city. He looked down from fountains, crossroads, and walls. Each time we saw one of these, we would exclaim, "There he is!" Finally, we consulted a guidebook, found the museum, and stood below his white torso. Rare the man who will not feel small next to that idol of perfection. I could not help but wonder about the purposes of this journey. It was the adventure and experience. Now David was not just a picture in a book, but a real entity. Out on the streets, the Florentines had revived Market Day as a flag-draped festival. Stalls offered silk and leather goods, clothes inlaid wood, slaughtered pigs and chickens hung from hooks, music blared from loudspeakers. Actors wandered about in gaudy period costumes. People laughed and sang as they purchased or sold items. The whole town seemed happy. I bought a small metal and plastic Giglio pin, the lily symbol of Florence, and some handkerchiefs for gifts. From downtown, we hefted our packs, marched over the old Ponte Vecchio Bridge spanning the bright Arno, and followed signs to the campground. Upscale shops selling gold on the bridge were exquisite, but so were the flower-dappled hillsides nearby. We climbed steep, switchback roads to terraces that gave sight of the river and camp, and knew we had found a home. So had a lot of European girls we noticed. After doing the laundry, I returned to our site and hung the clothes on a line. Lou's mummy bag aired out on top of the green tent. My pack and canteen sat waiting. I looked down at my open trip journal. It was only the 5th day on the road. Are we walking pens and scribing our lives every day? If so, what would I write in that almost empty book? Different trip. And I have to warn you, there's a little politics injected here at the end. This is called the West. Lou and I stared out over the prairie. In full view was a rainstorm whose dark curtains fell like bullets through lightning. 2 black tornadoes whirled near a rainbow, all dwarfed and enfolded in endless blue sky. Since we were completely exposed in open terrain, we looked below at an overpass on Route 80. This would offer shelter if a tornado came our way, but the panorama moved on without striking us. Dressed in jeans and cowboy hats, his gray, mine white, We had hitchhiked from home 3 days before. Our road skills had been refined 2 years previously in York, where we spent a month on a mere $350 apiece, including airfare. Cheap travel was our major accomplishment in life so far, and we did it with the guile and flair of Tolkien's elves. America was a much harder journey, though. The distances were longer. In York, there always seemed to be a quaint little town or inn just around the next curve, but the states have monotonous stretches of nothing. Still, we were on our way to California. One driver took us from New Jersey to Nebraska and stopped for every vagabond he saw. There were 20 people and a dog in the back of that dump truck when our engine finally blew up. Afterwards, our gypsy band scattered down the highway in ones and twos, gradually disappearing. Lou and I managed to get as far as Grand Island that night and slept in a dry creek bed. Now we were in a hot, deserted corner on the Colorado-Wyoming border in August, waiting for rides. The ground around us was just rock and scrub, weather dubious and cars scarce. We had water but little food, and had not taken showers since we left Philly. Time to find a motel. The town of Julesburg, 5 miles away, lay along the path of the original cross-country train tracks. We followed them, walking on a Colorado highway, careful not to hitch as it was illegal in that state. Step by step, I followed Lou's high brown pack with its small American flag patch until the vista wobbled before my eyes. With the afternoon sun in our faces, Lou sat on the ground. "This damn pack is heavy," he said. In fairness, he always had the weightier bag because he insisted on carrying our 2-man mountain tent. We rested briefly. Not wanting to stay our progress, I said, "Let's switch. I'll carry that one. You take mine." I took his pack and gave him my lighter red one. This was the only time I ever carried anything for him. He was too proud and able otherwise. But this had been a tough stretch. I just had more vim at the moment. We continued through the heat as a big sky light show distracted us overhead. Wide beams of color, pinks and blues, shot across the arching airs as if someone had opened the windows of heaven. Houses rode beside the rusty tracks. Police drove by in their cruisers, watchful. Deep in the heart of small-town America, we passed the ice cream place, the hamburger place, the liquor place, and finally came to a motel. Flopping down in our rented room, we turned on the TV and saw Nixon resigning. It was burgers and beer that night.